No Nanny lasted 24 hours with the Vampire King's wild triplets until this poor single mom served them breakfast. And all I did was make them custom-made waffles. But let me start at the beginning. With the moment I was so desperate for a job, any job, that I applied to be a live-in housekeeper in a remote cliffside manor for a man I'd later discover was the sovereign of an ancient vampire coven. With the morning, I walked into supernatural chaos happening in a mansion built from black glass and cold marble. With the day, I accidentally became a mother to 3 wild, impossibly powerful children who just needed someone to see them as kids instead of monsters. Before we dive into the story, drop a quick comment below and let me know what draws you to vampire stories. Your engagement really helps support this channel. My name is Celine Marinth. I'm 35 years old, and I'm a single mother barely surviving in this unforgiving city. My daughter Maya is 7, and for the past 3 years since her father abandoned us without explanation, I've been working 2 exhausting jobs just to keep us in our cramped apartment with its leaking ceiling and broken heating. Morning shift at the diner, night shift stocking shelves at the warehouse, anything that would pay, anything that would keep us fed. But 2 jobs weren't enough anymore. Rent went up. Maya needed winter boots. The eviction notice was taped to our door. And I was so tired I could barely see straight, my hands shaking from exhaustion and fear. So when I saw the ad, *housekeeper needed. Live-in position. Immediate start. Excellent pay. Discretion required *. I applied within seconds. I didn't care that the address was an isolated manor an hour outside the city. I didn't care that the pay seemed impossibly high. I just needed something to change before we ended up on the street. The interview was at dawn. I'd worked my warehouse shift until 4 a.m., gone home to get Maya ready and drop her at my neighbor's, and arrived at the manor gates exhausted, desperate, and probably smelling like cardboard and industrial cleaner. The gates opened automatically, revealing a long driveway that curved up a cliff face toward a structure that looked like it had been carved from shadow itself. All black glass and sharp angles, the Drakov Manor loomed against the gray morning sky like something out of a Gothic nightmare. The man who opened the door, tall, pale, with eyes like polished steel, looked at me with something between pity and curiosity. "You're here for the housekeeping position," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes, sir. My name is Kale. I manage the estate." He stepped aside. "Come in. I should warn you, Mr. Drakov has 5-year-old triplets. They are difficult. We've had 24 nannies in 1 year. None lasted more than 24 hours. The position was posted for housekeeping only, but frankly, we need someone who can handle the children as well. If you can manage both, the pay triples. 24 nannies. 1 year. I should have run. But tripled pay meant I could quit both jobs. Could actually have time with Maya. Could finally stop drowning. "I can try," I said. That's when I heard it. Not crying. Not laughing. Something between a shriek and a roar, the sound of something crashing, splintering, the kind of noise that said small children were destroying something very expensive very quickly. Kale's jaw tightened. That would be Alara, Ethan, and Elier. Mr. Drakov is in his study attempting to conduct business. The last nanny quit yesterday, lasted 9 hours, and he's managing them himself while handling international calls. As you can hear, it's going poorly. He led me through the most breathtaking and unsettling space I'd ever seen. Vaulted ceilings that disappeared into shadow. Furniture that looked centuries old, dark wood and black velvet. Windows stretching floor to ceiling, revealing a view of cliffs and crashing ocean below. Everything was immaculate, coldly beautiful, and utterly devoid of warmth. And in the middle of all this dark luxury, 3 identical 5-year-old children were creating absolute chaos. One, a girl with white blonde hair, was flying. Actually suspended 3 feet off the ground, her small body moving at impossible speed as she yanked priceless paintings off the walls. One, a boy with the same pale hair, was ripping through the room so fast he was barely visible, a blur of motion that sent furniture skidding across the marble floor. The third boy stood on top of a grand piano, his eyes glowing faintly red as he screamed with a rage that made the windows rattle. Their faces were too pale, their movements too fast, their eyes too bright. Not human. Not even close. Children, Kale said, his voice sharp. Stop this immediately. They ignored him completely, like he didn't exist. We've tried everything, Kale said over the noise, his composure cracking. Strict nannies. Gentle nannies. Specialists with every credential imaginable. They either can't control the children, or the children make them quit in terror. Mr. Drakov is at his wit's end. I watched the chaos. Watched 3 small, supernaturally powerful children who were clearly testing every boundary, pushing every limit, begging for someone to actually see them instead of trying to survive them. Have you tried feeding them? I said. Kale blinked. What? They're destroying things because something's wrong. When's the last time they ate? Not blood or whatever, just normal food. Breakfast. They don't eat human food. They're children, I interrupted. And children need routines. Structure. Breakfast. I walked past Kale, into the chaos, and raised my voice, not shouting, but firm and clear. Who wants waffles? The destruction stopped. 3 pairs of glowing eyes turned toward me, suspicious, wild, but listening. My little sister said only boring people watch storytelling channels, and I'll never hit 1K subscribers. If you're here and you're not boring, subscribe right now. Let's prove her wrong. Custom-made waffles, I continued, meeting each of their gazes without flinching. But you have to help me make them. And you have to wait until they're ready. Can you do that? The girl descended slowly, her feet touching the floor. The blur boy stopped moving, solidifying into a small, wary child. The screaming boy on the piano went quiet. Waffles, the girl whispered. Custom made, I confirmed. Your choice of toppings. But we make them together and we follow the rules. Deal? For the first time in what I suspected was a very long time, all 3 children nodded. I turned toward the kitchen, and they followed, not flying, not blurring, but walking. Kale stared at me like I'd performed a miracle. And from somewhere deep in the shadowed study, a pair of ancient, weary eyes watched through the doorway as his impossible children sat quietly at the kitchen counter, waiting for breakfast like normal kids. King Kashin Valyar Drakov leaned back in his chair, a faint, disbelieving smile touching his lips. Hire her, he said into the phone to Kale. Immediately. Whatever she wants. She stays. Celine and Maya moved into the Drakov manor 3 days later with 2 suitcases and a worn stuffed rabbit that Maya refused to leave behind. Their quarters were on the 3rd floor, a suite larger than their entire apartment had been, with windows overlooking the cliffs and an adjoining room for Maya that had its own fireplace. The luxury was overwhelming, almost suffocating, but Maya's delighted squeal when she saw the canopy bed made Celine's chest ache with relief. We get to stay here, Mama? Really? Really, sweetheart. The triplets appeared in the doorway, so suddenly Celine's heart skipped. One moment the hall was empty. The next, 3 identical pale faces were watching them with unblinking curiosity. You brought a small human, Alara said, tilting her head. That's my daughter, Maya, Celine said calmly, unpacking clothes into the antique dresser. Maya, these are Alara, Ethan, and Elliot. Maya, bless her fearless heart, waved. Hi, do you want to see my rabbit? The triplets exchanged glances, then nodded in perfect unison. Within minutes, all 4 children were on Maya's floor, playing with her meager collection of toys like it was the greatest treasure in the world. Celine watched from the doorway, her guard still up, but hopeful. That hope lasted exactly 2 hours. Celine had stepped into her own room to finish unpacking when she heard it, a sound like wind rushing through a tunnel, a blur of motion in her peripheral vision. She turned just in time to see Ethan vanish and reappear on the opposite side of the room in less than a heartbeat. Then Elliot joined him. Then Alara. They moved so fast Celine couldn't track them, 3 streaks of supernatural speed dismantling her carefully unpacked belongings in seconds. Clothes flew from drawers. Books tumbled from shelves. Her suitcase flipped upside down, contents scattered across the floor like a tornado had torn through. And then they stopped, standing in the center of the destruction, watching her with those glowing eyes, waiting for her reaction. Testing her. Every instinct screamed at Celine to yell, to panic, to call for Kale. But she'd seen this before, different circumstances, but the same desperate need for boundaries, for someone to care enough to enforce them. She took a slow breath and sat down on the floor amid the chaos. "Okay," she said quietly. "That was fast. Really impressive." The triplets blinked, clearly surprised she wasn't screaming. "But now we have a problem," Celine continued. "This is my room, and I had it organized a specific way. So here's what's going to happen. You 3 are going to help me put every single thing back exactly where it belongs. Slowly. One item at a time. And we're going to practice the skill called asking permission." Elara's lip trembled. "You're angry." "I'm teaching," Celine corrected gently. "There's a difference. Come here." She picked up a folded shirt and handed it to Ethan. "This goes in the second drawer. Can you put it there carefully?" He stared at the shirt like it was a foreign object, then moved, not at super speed, but at a normal child's pace, and placed it in the drawer. "Perfect," Celine said. "Eliar, you're next." For the next 30 minutes, the 4 of them worked together, rebuilding order from chaos. Celine narrated each step, praised each careful movement, and gently corrected when someone moved too fast. By the time they finished, all 3 triplets were sitting cross-legged on her floor, exhausted but calm. "Why didn't you yell?" Elara whispered. "Because you're not bad kids," Celine said simply. "You're just testing to see if I'll stay. And I will. Even when you make messes. Even when you use your speed. But we do it together, with respect. Deal?" 3 small heads nodded. From the shadowed hallway outside, King Kashin Valyar Drakov stood perfectly still, listening to every word. He'd been preparing to intervene, to apologize for his children's behavior, to watch another caretaker break under the weight of their power. But she hadn't broken. She'd taught them. For the first time in the year since his queen had died, Kashin felt something shift in his chest, a fragile, dangerous thing called hope. He stepped back into the shadows, watching as Celine tucked all 4 children into Maya's bed for an impromptu story time, her voice soft and steady, and realized with startling clarity that he would do anything to keep this mortal woman in his home, even if it meant protecting her from the very darkness he embodied. The tantrum happened on the 5th night. Celine woke to the sound of windows rattling in their frames, the entire manor shuddering as if caught in an earthquake. She grabbed her robe and ran toward the children's wing, her heart hammering. Eliar was in the center of his room, levitating 3 feet off the floor, his small body rigid and glowing with an eerie red light. His eyes were completely black, tears streaming down his pale cheeks as objects flew around him in a violent orbit, books, toys, furniture spinning faster and faster. Elara and Ethan huddled in the corner, terrified of their brother's power. "Eliar," Celine said firmly, stepping into the chaos. A wooden block shot past her head, missing by inches. "Elia, I'm here." "Can't stop it," the boy sobbed, his voice distorted and echoing. "Can't make it stop." Celine didn't hesitate. She walked directly into the vortex, grabbed the floating child, and pulled him against her chest, wrapping her arms around him tightly. The objects continued to spin, battering against her back, but she held on, rocking him slowly. "Breathe with me," she murmured into his hair. "In. Out. In. Out. You're safe. I've got you." Eliar's small hands clutched her robe, his body shaking violently as the power raged through him. But Celine kept rocking, kept breathing, kept holding him with absolute certainty that she would not let go. Slowly, gradually, the objects began to fall. The red light dimmed. The shaking subsided. When Elior finally went limp in her arms, exhausted and mortal fragile again, the room was destroyed, but he was safe. Celine carried him to his bed, tucked him in, and kissed his forehead. "Sleep now," she whispered. When she turned, King Kashan Valyr Drakov stood in the doorway. He was terrifying in the dim light, tall, powerfully built, his face carved from shadow and ancient beauty, his eyes burning with an intensity that made her instinctively step back. He wore dark clothing that seemed to absorb the moonlight, and the air around him felt heavy, dangerous. "You should be afraid," he said quietly. Celine straightened, meeting his gaze despite the fear crawling up her spine. "Of what?" "A scared little boy. Of what he could have done to you. Of what I am. Of this world you've walked into." Kashan's voice was rough, strained. 24 others ran. "Why don't you?" "Because they need me. They're not your children." "Neither were you theirs," Celine shot back, exhaustion making her bold. "Those nannies saw monsters. I see kids who lost their mother and don't know how to grieve." Something in Kashan's expression cracked. He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him, suddenly seeming less like a king and more like a man carrying an unbearable weight. "I don't know how to help them," he confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "Since my queen died, I've tried everything. Discipline. Patience. Distance. Nothing works. I'm failing them. I'm failing her memory." Celine saw the raw pain in his ancient eyes and felt her own walls crumbling. "You're not failing. You're grieving too. And you're doing it alone. I have no choice. This is what I am: darkness, isolation, immortality. I can't afford weakness. Asking for help isn't weakness." Celine's voice softened. "I know what it's like to carry everything alone. After Maya's father left, I convinced myself I had to be invincible. But I wasn't. I was terrified. Still am most days." Kashan studied her face. "What frightens you?" The question was so direct, so unexpectedly gentle, that the truth spilled out. "The dark," Celine admitted, shame heating her cheeks. "The unknown. When I was young, something happened. I got lost in the woods at night, alone for hours, convinced I'd die there. I've been afraid of darkness ever since. Ironic, considering where I'm working now." Kashan's expression transformed into something achingly tender. He moved closer, slowly, giving her time to retreat. When she didn't, he reached out and took her hand. His skin was cold, but his grip was gentle. "My darkness is a shield for you now, Celine," he said, his voice a solemn vow. "Nothing in the shadows will ever harm you. Not while I exist. You have my word, my eternal protection." Celine felt tears prick her eyes. "Why?" "Because you held my son when his power was destroying him. Because you see my children as worthy of love." He paused. "Because you're the first light this house has seen in a year." Celine didn't pull away when he lifted her hand and pressed it against his chest, where a heart should have beat but didn't. "Stay," Kashan whispered. "Please." And despite every reasonable fear, despite the impossibility of it all, Celine nodded. "I'll stay." 3 weeks into their new life, the manor transformed. Maya taught the triplets how to play hide-and-seek the human way, counting to 20, no super speed, no flying, just giggling children tucking themselves behind curtains and under tables. In return, Alara showed Maya how to make small objects levitate, just an inch off the ground, her stuffed rabbit floating briefly before settling back into her palms with delighted squeals. Celine found them in the library one afternoon, all 4 children sprawled on the enormous rug, playing a board game with rules they'd apparently invented themselves. Ethan was explaining something about dragons with the seriousness only a 5-year-old could muster, while Maya nodded along, completely unfazed that her new friends could probably turn into mist if they wanted to. "Mother Celine." Elior called out without looking up. "Ethan says dragons are real, but I think he's making it up." "Are dragons real?" Celine's breath caught. Mother Celine. So casual, so natural, as if she'd always been theirs. I think, she said carefully, her voice thick, that in a world with vampires, anything's possible. That evening, Maya climbed into Cashin's lap during story time, something she'd been doing more frequently, and sleepily murmured, "Father Cashin, will you read the next chapter?" Cashin froze, his ancient eyes widening as he looked at Celine across the room. She saw the vulnerability there, the question, the desperate hope. She smiled, nodding slightly. Cashin's arms tightened around Maya, and when he spoke, his voice was rough with emotion. "Of course, little one." Later, after all 4 children were asleep, Cashin found Celine on the cliffside terrace, wrapped in a shawl against the cold night air. The full moon hung enormous and silver above the crashing waves. "Come with me," he said quietly. "I have something for you." He led her down a stone path to a clearing she'd never noticed before, where ancient trees formed a perfect circle. In the center, candles floated in midair, casting warm golden light that pushed back the darkness. Flower petals, night-blooming jasmine, covered the ground in a fragrant carpet. "What is this?" Celine whispered. "A full moon ritual," Cashin said. "An old tradition among my kind, used to seal bonds and honor those we cherish." He stepped closer, pulling a small velvet box from his coat. "Celine, you came into my home as a desperate stranger, and you've become the center of everything. You've given my children their childhood back. You've given me hope." He opened the box, revealing an amulet on a delicate silver chain. The pendant was a clear crystal wrapped in intricate silver vines, and it glowed with a soft, warm light, not harsh, but gentle, like a candle flame that could never be extinguished. "The amulet of clarity," Cashin said. "Forged centuries ago, imbued with eternal light. It will glow for you always, Celine. No darkness will ever touch you while you wear it. Your fear ends tonight." Celine's hands trembled as he fastened it around her neck. The moment it settled against her skin, warmth spread through her chest, and the shadows that always lurked at the edges of her vision simply vanished. The night was still dark, but it no longer felt threatening. It felt peaceful. "Cashin," she breathed, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You are under my protection," he said, his hands cradling her face with devastating gentleness. "You and Maya both. My darkness shields you. My power guards you. And if you'll allow it," his voice dropped to a vulnerable whisper, "my heart is yours." Celine looked up at this ancient, powerful king who'd been brought to his knees by 3 chaotic children and a poor single mother, and realized with stunning clarity that she'd fallen completely, irrevocably in love with him. "My heart's been yours since you hired me for making waffles," she whispered back. Cashin's smile was like dawn breaking, radiant, transforming, beautiful. When he kissed her under the full moon, surrounded by floating candles and magic older than nations, Celine felt the last piece of her broken life click into place. She was home. They all were. Do you think Cashin and Celine's bond is strong enough to survive what's coming? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. Regent Valerius arrived without warning on a moonless night, striding through the manor's front doors as if he owned them. Celine was reading to the children in the library when the temperature plummeted, her breath misting in the suddenly frigid air. The amulet at her throat flared warm in warning. The man who entered was ancient power incarnate, taller even than Cashin, draped in crimson robes embroidered with silver runes, his face sharp and cruel, his eyes like chips of black ice. 3 vampire guards flanked him, their expressions blank and obedient. "Where is the king?" Valerius demanded, his voice echoing with unnatural resonance. Cashin materialized from the shadows, positioning himself between the regent and his family. "Valerius, you were not summoned." "I come under the authority of the Elder Council," Valerius said coldly, producing a rolled parchment sealed with blood-red wax. "We have received reports of concerning developments. Specifically," his gaze cut to Celine with open disgust, "that you have installed a mortal woman in a position of authority over the royal heirs." that you've allowed her to corrupt them with human weakness. She is their guardian, Cashin said, his voice dropping to a dangerous register. And you will address her with respect. She is a contamination. Valerius's shout made the windows rattle. Look at them, your heirs, playing human games, eating human food, calling this mortal mother like common orphans. You shame your bloodline, Cashin. You shame your queen's memory. Selene stood slowly, her hand instinctively moving to gather the children behind her. Maya and the triplets pressed close, their small bodies trembling. The Elder Council has granted me authority to intervene, Valerius continued, unfurling the parchment. Ancient symbols glowed along its surface. I invoke the right of severance. The heirs will be removed to proper supervision. Their powers will be bound until they prove themselves worthy of the Drakov name. And this mortal, he smiled cruelly, will be expelled and her memory of this world erased. You have no right, Cashin started forward, but Valerius's guards moved with supernatural speed, forming a barrier. I have every right. Valerius raised the parchment, and the symbols began to burn with black fire. He began chanting in the old tongue, words of binding and severance that made the air crack with power. The triplets cried out in pain as invisible chains wrapped around them, pulling them away from Selene. Ilara's levitation flickered and died. Ethan collapsed, his speed draining away. Eliar's eyes dimmed from red to dull gray. No. Selene lunged forward, but the magical barrier threw her back. Mother Selene. Maya screamed. Valerius's smile widened. You see? They're already weakened by your human sentiment. Better to remove the infection now before. Stop. Selene's voice wasn't loud, but it cut through the chanting like a blade. She stood, the amulet of clarity blazing with brilliant light that pushed against the regent's dark magic. She walked forward, and where the barrier had repelled her before, it now parted like water. These children, Selene said, her voice steady and absolute, are not infected. They're not broken. They're not weak. She reached the triplets and pulled them against her, one arm around all three, her other hand finding Maya. They are loved. They are safe. They are mine. You're immortal, Valerius hissed. You have no power here. I am their mother, Selene said, and the amulet's light intensified, golden and pure and utterly unyielding. And you will not touch my children. The binding chains around the triplets shattered. Valerius staggered back, shock breaking through his composure. Impossible. Leave my home, Selene commanded, and though she had no supernatural power of her own, something in her voice, something ancient and primal and recognized by every creature present, made it an undeniable order. Now. For a moment, Valerius hesitated, rage and disbelief warring on his face. Then his expression twisted into something venomous. You dare command me? I am regent of the Elder Council. I will see you destroyed and these abominations with you. He raised his hands, dark magic coalescing into deadly spears of shadow. And the entire manor erupted with the fury of a king whose family had been threatened. Cashin moved faster than sight itself. One moment he was across the room. The next, he stood between Valerius and his family, and the power that radiated from him was apocalyptic, light and shadow colliding in a maelstrom that shattered every window in the manor, that made the marble floors crack, that pulled the very air into a vortex around the Vampire King. His eyes burned crimson, his form seeming to expand, ancient and terrible and absolutely sovereign. You threaten my children, Cashin said, his voice resonating with centuries of accumulated power. You threaten my consort. You committed treason against the crown. Valerius's dark magic spears disintegrated before they reached him. The regent stumbled back, fear finally breaking through his arrogance. The council will. The council answers to me. Cashin's roar shook the foundation. I am king. My word is law. And my law protects those who cannot protect themselves, including children whose only crime is being different in a world too cruel to understand them. He raised one hand, and Valerius lifted off the ground, suspended by invisible force, choking. You would have broken them, bound them, destroyed the very qualities that make them precious. Cassion's expression was merciless. For that, you forfeit your existence. Valerius had one moment to scream before he simply ceased, not destroyed, but erased, unmade, as if he'd never drawn breath. His guards fled into shadow and silence fell. Cassion turned, his power still crackling around him, and dropped to his knees before Selene. The terrible king became a man again, vulnerable and desperate. Forgive me, he whispered. I should have protected you better. Should have anticipated. Selene pulled him into her arms, uncaring of the power still sparking across his skin. You did protect us. We're safe. Cassion pulled back, his hands framing her face. Selene Marinth, I name you my consort before all the immortal world. Guardian of the blood. Protector of my heirs. Your law of kindness now governs this house and all who dwell within it. Will you accept? Through tears, Selene smiled. Yes. The amulet at her throat blazed, and magic settled over her like a blessing, not changing her, but sanctifying what she'd already become. 6 months later, Selene stood in the manor's great hall wearing a gown of midnight silk embroidered with silver thread, the Drakov crest now emblazoned over her heart. Cassion, devastating in formal black, slid a ring onto her finger, an eternal band that glowed softly, matching her amulet. My queen, he whispered, and kissed her as their assembled witnesses, vampires and the few trusted humans, erupted in celebration. Maya and the triplets scattered flower petals, laughing, calling out, Mother, Father, with unrestrained joy. Another 6 months passed. On an ordinary Tuesday morning, Selene stood in the manor's enormous kitchen wearing comfortable clothes and the Drakov crest on a simple chain, her hair pulled back, flour dusting her hands. Elara, can you get the strawberries from the refrigerator, please? She asked. Yes, Mother Selene. The girl zoomed across the kitchen at human speed, because that was the rule during cooking, and returned with the bowl. Ethan, how many waffles do we need? Her son counted carefully on his fingers. For kids, plus you, plus father when he wakes up, 6. Perfect math. Maya, can you help Eliar with the waffle iron? I've got it, Mama, Maya said, guiding her youngest brother's hand as he carefully poured batter. Cassion appeared in the doorway, drawn by the scent of cooking and the sound of his family. He leaned against the frame, watching his queen, his impossible, precious queen, teaching their 4 children the sacred ritual of making custom-made waffles, and felt peace settle into bones that had known only war for centuries. Selene looked up, caught his gaze, and smiled, that radiant, knowing smile that had conquered a king. Good morning, she said. Waffles will be ready in 5 minutes. Good morning, my love, Cassion replied, crossing to kiss her temple. Take your time. We have forever. And surrounded by the chaotic, beautiful noise of children and breakfast and family, the poor single mother who'd once been desperate for any job held the hand of the Vampire King and knew with absolute certainty that she was exactly where she belonged. Home. You made it to the end. Someone told me 90% of viewers quit before the ending. You just proved them wrong. Now subscribe and comment, finished it, so I can show them the real stats.